Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 4th, 2017. Should we do a show today? I don't know. Is it even worth it? Once we've had the news that that Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski are engaged to actually be married, that kind of engaged, not engaged for another season of their ridiculous show, but engaged to be married. What's the point? I don't know. I'm not certain how this affects anything. I don't watch the show. Many of you don't watch the show. Is it weird that they're married? I guess so. And I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of it, but I guess they feel like they have to tell everybody. Is that a disclosure you have to make? Is there anything going on in the show that makes you think like somehow, they're not under any obligation to debate one another or anything, are they? And we're not supposed to, I don't know. Anyway, I guess, congratulations. Hooray. We're always happy about a couple getting together, I guess. For real. Not really certain why, but it feels like something we need to address. That's done now. We can move on to the rest of the news of the day. Daily Coast Radio is live, as Bill tells us all the way from Portland, Maine. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Engaged to myself, thank you very much. Previews today's GOP vote to make death panels a reality for freedom, of course. It's not just that they're doing this for freedom. I will be previewing it for freedom as well. The bill continues to get worse and worse. And of course, the Upton amendment, which Fred Upton proposed just the other day, it turns out he just found out it wouldn't really do anything or help anybody anyway. So he may still be a no vote in all of this. It's very confusing to figure out who's going to fall where. Of course, today's your last chance to call Congress and let them know that you'll tar and feather them if they vote for something like this. If it's good enough for the founders, it's good enough for me. Greg Dworkin joins us from Connecticut. Is there some kind of rush order on this morning, Greg?
Yeah, a little bit. I was just going to sit in the background and listen.
Oh, okay.
It's just so much going on. I thought I'd get on early.
Sure. Well, why not? You can, of course, join in at any time. Look at this. Well, so how about that? Are you a watcher of Morning Joe or no?
No.
Okay.
I know that they announced their engagement, and I'm waiting for Trump to tweet about it.
Yeah, I'm not certain how he's going to feel about that one. He's probably going to rate Mika on a scale of 1 to 10 and tell everybody whether he thinks Joe did well or not.
All those people that they were yelling at for gossiping about them.
Oh, were they? I mean, I guess I didn't notice that.
Talking about us. You keep saying we're having an affair.
Well, I guess this, I don't know. Were either of them married before?
It's going to be a planned and catered affair, apparently.
Oh, well, okay. I'm sure maybe they'll do it at Mar-a-Lago. That would be that would be like for work, They could schedule it for a time when Trump's going to be there.
Yeah.
And I know they have big plans, as I said this morning, for them to do the show from now on, probably John and Yoko style. Right. Just to add to the intimacy of the program.
I could see Trump doing that. I could see Trump saying, listen, because you're such good friends and because you work in media, we'll be happy to charge you 3 times as much as normal.
That could be the truth. And, but he loves to have weddings there.
Or you could have it at the White House, which I'm also selling, catering for.
This is also entirely possible. Either one could work. It's a dream wedding, really, for both of them. Have either of them been married before? I don't know.
I presume Scarborough.
Yeah, I mean, that's my guess, but I don't really know. Okay, well, it's a big deal to somebody. I'm not certain why, because at the same time, 180-something million Americans find their health care in jeopardy.
But I can't say that I really care about Scarborough and Brzezinski at all. It's just, one of those head scratchers and say, gee, that's interesting. You know what else is going on here? We got the Comey.
He's getting married.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's terrific.
He testified in front of Congress yesterday about the last election, and today, of course, is the healthcare vote.
Yes.
And I think the healthcare vote is the more important of the stories, but the Comey one's pretty big too.
Bill. Yes. Okay, that's true. Also, people sort of waking up to the fact, I see now the second and third round of realizations that a poorly drafted, hastily drafted bill now leaves employer-sponsored health care in jeopardy, too. We mentioned this the other
Lifetime
day.
caps would be gone, and they can find crappier insurance for you, and they'll be more happy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's all sorts of stuff going on. I have a bunch of tweets toward the bottom of the list that I gave you. Just because it's happening so fast, you can't even find written stories about it. So it's all in tweet form.
You can't find a written bill about it. So
yeah, exactly. But one of the outcomes of this, of course, is going to be more trouble for the House. I see that there's a new challenger to Illinois Representative Roscom, a top D target. Kelly Mazecki announces a run for Congress in Illinois' 6th congressional district and starts out by saying, among other things, as a 57-year-old mother who once lost her health insurance, survived breast cancer, and paid for coverage of a daughter with a rare medical condition, I say it's time the people of Illinois' 6th district hold Peter Roscom accountable for voting to make Americans pay more and get less for their health care.
Okay.
So that's how she starts. She's going to be the first of many. And on the one hand, we have the brilliance of the Republicans deciding that their campaign slogan for 2018 is going to be, we're incompetent and you're stupid.
That's good.
Here's Deputy Whip Tom Cole from Oklahoma on NPR just now. Don't worry about the Affordable, the American Health Care Act because states won't use the waivers anyway. That's the Upton, amendment to try to get it passed. And the Senate bill will be different. So don't worry about what we do because none of what we're doing is actually going to happen. Just let us go about doing our business, which is political cover rather than policy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a great proposal, right? We're going to do this thing that we're also not going to do.
Right.
So
we're not really going to do it. So don't bother us about yelling us for stuff that we're going to do because we didn't do it anyway.
Right.
We just voted for it, but it's not the same thing. You have to understand, you stupid people, that what we're voting for is not what we want and not what we're going to do. You got that? That's going to be really, really good I can't wait for the town meetings on this.
It's going to be fun.
Right. So, Ben Wickler, who is the Washington director of Move On, has some good points here. He says, if House GOP succeeds in passing Trump Care tonight or any day, and they will pass it today, the public's immediate response will massively shape what happens next. The biggest risk, and this is where you get on media's case for comforting the comfortable and afflicting the afflicted, the biggest risk is the vote gets hailed as a breakthrough victory for Trump and the GOP, praised by conservative groups. It'll be tempting for activists to immediately swing their focus over to Senate. Don't do that. Job one is blowback in the House. Paraphrasing him just a tad. Most of all, swing senators will be watching to see what kind of political price GOP representatives pay for voting to uninsure their constituents. Citizens' jobs will be to make clear that voting for AHCA is politically toxic, career suicide, highly visible public firestorm, including that lady who's now running against Peter Roscom. If the House passes Trump Care, every Republican member of Congress has to feel like they're walking into a political buzzsaw. That's why those town meetings are so important. Their phones should ring off the hook. Their district offices should be jammed. Town halls, furious overflow crowds chanting shame. The intensity and visibility of response to the House vote will define the news cycle and the Senate's willingness to touch this thing. So, if we lose the vote, don't mourn, fight, crucify the House. Only after pulverizing the House GOP, turn eyes ablaze to the Senate. I think it's great advice. I think he's right.
I think so, too. And what do you know? They're coming home next week. They won't be having any town hall meetings, but they are going home. Feel free to drag them from their cars and homes into traffic if necessary. Tar and feathers, highly recommended. Good enough for the founders. Good enough for me.
Right.
It's expensive.
Kevin Collins, political scientist, says if the GOP House bill gutting the ACA passes, and I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when, it doesn't take a messaging guru to know what to say about GOP incumbents. The Republican Party removed coverage for pre-existing conditions and millions of Americans kept those protections for themselves in the new bill. That codicil about the House staff being exempt is still there. We talked about why, but it's worth going over again quickly. In any case, Kevin Collins says they kept the text of the bill secret until the very last hour to keep the American people from knowing what they were doing. That meant voting before Congress's own nonpartisan economists could estimate how much it would cost, or how many people it would affect. In other words, they went before the CBO could do anything.
Yes. And the CBO cannot do anything and should not, because, of course, that information could affect the outcome of the election. And we don't do that.
We don't do that. We just let James Comey announce it. So because the American public was polled on the last version of the bill, 17% supported, and that's before they made it worse. And then they yanked health coverage from millions of Americans and let insurance CEOs jack up costs for those with chronic conditions and let those CEOs sell fourth-rate plans that inflated costs, plans that didn't include essential health benefits, like vaccines that prevent virulent contagious outbreaks, cancer screenings, all of which they did so they could cut taxes for those insurance company CEOs. That's because those elites, to whom the GOP is loyal, not to the American public, overwhelmingly opposed this bill even before they secretly plotted to make it far worse for you and rushed that bill to a vote before you could see what they were doing. And that's exactly what happened, and that's why there's the lifetime caps elimination and other things that will affect you even if you have employer-based insurance. So if you're thinking, it doesn't really bother me because I'm not on Medicaid, and by the way, I'm not on the exchanges. Yes, it's going to affect you, and you're going to be the one that's going to suffer from it.
Yes. Well, all your company has to do is open a mailbox office in a state that has crappier insurance than the state they work in now, and you get that state's insurance.
In addition, it's really important to remember as the talking point people try to say, oh, well, but it's going to do this or it's going to do that. Or look at this amendment. It's going to make this change. It's really going to mitigate what you're talking about here. The bill cuts $1 trillion in funding for healthcare while cutting taxes for the top 2% by about the same amount.
That seems fair when you think about it.
Well, it's balanced.
Right. There's a cut, and then there's also lots of money going to somebody else.
Right. Exactly.
So there you go. That works pretty well. This upcoming break is an opportunity, whether they have town hall meetings or not. I mean, occasionally, I assume, I don't know. It won't change very many minds. It won't make a difference in the House. It could change the outcome in the Senate if a few House members bumped up against their lifetime limits after this recess.
Well, you know who that would affect, the lifetime limits things, and people who obtain health insurance through their employers? Mm-hmm. About half the country.
Yes. I did see an estimate of something in the neighborhood of 159 million people, of course, who are covered by employer insurance. Plus, of course, the 24 million who'd simply be tossed out of insurance that they bought over the exchanges. So it's like 185 million people. That is in a country of 300 million or so. That's quite a bit.
I'm just adding this to the very bottom of the list here, but I just like this tweet. It's from House Republicans, at House GOP, and it's dated 18 March 2010.
Please don't kill us.
And the tweet says, question, will Speaker Pelosi wait for the final number from the CBO?
What's the date on that one?
March 18th, 2010.
2010. Will Speaker Pelosi wait for the final number from the CBO? Will she?
Well, I think she did.
Okay.
And it's so weird because, as you pointed out, many of the things that are happening here are, in fact, things that they mistakenly or misleadingly accused Democrats of doing. They love to accuse Democrats, for example. You didn't read the bill before you passed it. Of course, it was out there for months and months, and of course they did. Speaker Pelosi went on TV at some point, gave an interview, and said, you really need to read the bill to see what's in here, meaning if you only read the bill the way we did, you'll understand what's in it. They used that as a talking point to claim that Democrats never read it and look at the size of the bill and how big it is. In fact, Republicans haven't a clue as to what's in here. They don't care. That's not what they're doing. They need to pass something, anything. They're desperate to do that and then throw it over to the Senate and say whatever happens is not our fault.
Yeah.
And that's why they're doing this. And all of these extra things that are being added on has nothing to do with policy. That's why the Upton Amendment is political cover, so that they could say, see, we took care of your concerns. Now let's just get it out of the House and say we won, because winning is important. We don't really care about policy. We've never cared about policy. This is integral, this particular setup here, to decreasing taxes more, which is the only thing we care about because that's what our donors care about. So we're going to give it over to the Senate, and then we'll see what happens. People who expect the Senate to just not pass this, that's not reality. What will happen is the Senate will pass something, and then it'll go to reconciliation or committee or however the proper term is, and work out the details, and then something will become law. That's likely what's going to happen here. And the only way to prevent that is to make sure that Republicans pay a political price. So get off your butt and start calling your congressman.
Okay.
Particularly if you have Republican congressmen.
Right. But just call anybody.
Well, call your congressman and support them if they did the right thing. And
right.
Call Republican congressmen and give it to them. They need to hear this. If they think that they can get away with this sort of thing, then, you don't know what's next.
Well, you can guess, but you can't be 100% sure because the crazy doesn't stop. So who knows what they might pull on you next.
Right. Now, there is a New York Times story that covered one of the things we talked about on the show the other day, and that is that Trump suggesting that maybe they should get the filibuster for everything in the Senate so he can get his agenda passed sparked a backlash from Republican senators who said, no way, we like the way it is. Thank you very much. Go away.
Oh.
So there's a story about that in the New York Times.
Yes. We'll take that one up.
Which, let's see. So I'll find that and pass that along to you. But it does exist, just so you know.
All right. Well, it's good to know things. I just saw, when is this from? Just a few minutes ago. Jennifer Bendery from Huffington Post.
Yeah.
Tweeting, just to add to our misery. I guess somebody's reading something about the bill. Also tucked into the Republicans' Obamacare repeal bill, unsurprisingly, a provision to defund Planned Parenthood. But apparently, I don't know whether that was discussed at any point. It's no surprise, certainly, but it's interesting that we have to be reminded, A, that this is happening over and over again, and B, that they're just still finding fun nuggets in there. It's about the worst thing you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
They're
so
scheduled to
now
vote
the House is Sungmin Kim.
Yes.
Congressional Reporter reports that the House is voting on a separate bill to kill that exemption. And we talked at length about why it's in the bill and why you need a separate bill to get rid of it.
So
it has to be in the bill,
yeah,
because the Homeland Security Committee, which is responsible for House member benefits, never marked it up. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if they weren't exempt, it would be in violation of the Byrd Rule. However, they know it's political poison, so they have to get rid of it, but they have to do that separately, probably after this passes.
Yes, so no scheduled vote on that at this point?
Just an announcement. That's all I see. House is voting on a separate bill to kill the exemption.
Like Donald Trump, they're looking seriously at it.
Yeah, because they're very serious people.
Yes.
Now, another thing that, a question comes up as to whether or not the list of pre-existing conditions is going to include common things like pregnancy, victims of domestic violence, rape. Are these things pre-existing conditions by which you can then deny people health care? Well,
sure, why not?
It can't be denied because the pre-existing condition codicil is still there, but individual companies determine for themselves whether they can jack your rates up based on those pre-existing conditions. In fact, individual companies are the ones that decide what's a pre-existing condition in the first place.
Right.
So that's not by federal law or state law. At least until the Affordable Care Act came along and said you can't do that anymore. In the old days, it was individual insurance companies who would say, you have a rash. That's a pre-existing condition. I'm not going to cover you.
If it's a condition, then that's it.
Who do you challenge? You could appeal to the insurance company.
You could press 2, for instance.
Yeah, and wait for somebody to come on the line.
Yes.
So that part is of course a mishmash of unclear. And then if it's true that the new bill will get rid of lifetime caps in even employer-based insurance, then what's the overall effect budget-wise? And does that fall under the Byrd Rule? I mean, it gets to be really complicated in terms of what is and isn't, because can you really make a 10-year revenue-neutral claim if you don't really know what the results are of what's going on? And that's why it's very difficult to bring the entire bill without having a CBO score.
That is true. It's difficult to know anything about it, and difficult to see why, for instance, Republicans in the Senate would be interested in helping anyone determine whether or not this thing passes muster under the Byrd rule. Why not just leave it a mystery and say, well, gosh, we can't go forward until we know, and never take the thing up?
You could. And, of course, the other point about the Byrd rule that you pointed out the other day is that it says what you say it says.
That's right.
And that's always the case with process and when you have the gavel, which we've talked about ad infinitum going back to the primaries. So if McConnell in the Senate wants to say the Byrd rule says X, he could always talk to the parliamentarian and then fire the parliamentarian if they don't like the answer. So there is no fixed thing that says you can't do this except for Social Security, which is written into the bill.
Yes, which I guess, I mean...
The original,
right.
What is it, the Budget Act
yes.
of 74
right.
said you can't bring Social Security to reconciliation.
Right.
Other than that, it's what you say it is.
Right. That's generally the case, although I have often wondered, I mean, suppose they just said, screw it, I'm writing it in here anyway, and there's lots of protest, and then they override all of that, and then they pass it. Then there has to be a lawsuit, and the judges have to decide if this is something that they want to step into, and is this clear enough, and depending on the circumstances, they might, and I guess
well,
depending on other
as Seth
circumstances,
Maskett, political scientist, noted this morning on Twitter, never underestimate the determined will of a political majority to pass something and commit political suicide.
Yes.
If they want to do it, they'll do it.
Yeah. Even if they believe, I don't know. I mean, it could be a suicide cult. You never know.
You never know. But, again, it's our job, the resistance and ordinary citizens and so on and so forth, to make sure that there is a big price to pay. It's interesting because the original never came to the floor vote version 1.0. You may recall.
Yes.
Some of the pundits were sitting around saying, as bad and as embarrassing it is for the Republicans to have this not come to a vote, it would have been worse if it passed because it's political poison. Well, let's see what they're saying now. If those very same pundits turn around and say, what a huge political victory for the Republicans, don't be surprised,
right. Because
most pundits don't really think past 24 hours.
I guess that's a possibility, a distinct possibility to see them force this thing through early afternoon today, and this evening have headlines about the optics of the win.
And that's why it's so important that the initial reaction is overwhelming outrage.
Yes, like the snap polls. The pundits told you during the debates that the winner was the other guy, and there were snap polls available to say nobody in America believes that. That was kind
right.
of
And so when the Kaiser polls come out and other things, looking at what people actually think of what passed, which really can't happen until they hear about it. I think that the initial response is going to be important, and the response to the CBO when they finally do score it is going to be important.
I guess so.
Remember, the original bill made it clear that 24 million people were going to be thrown off of health care. And there's nothing in this bill now that's going to change that. It might get worse, but it's not going to get better based on what they've done.
Yeah, not even the people who wrote the amendments think so for some
right,
reason.
Right, exactly. So you have Tom Cole saying, don't worry about it because this isn't really the bill.
Okay. Well, then, this isn't really a health care bill. How about that?
How about that? Well, it's not. It's a tax cut.
Yes. And this isn't even it, apparently.
Yeah.
Could be worse. And I
suppose,
so
Sarah Cliff has this piece here. I just thought I'd throw this in
right.
for those who want some background. You already, talked about this, but the Republicans exempt their own insurance from their latest healthcare proposal. And it's nice because it talks about and references, as it says here, a bit of background. Obamacare requires all members of Congress and their staff to purchase coverage through the health laws marketplace, just like Obamacare enrollees. The politics of that plank were simple enough, meant to demonstrate that if the coverage in the law was good enough for Americans, it should be good enough for their representatives in Washington. So that's been 4 years now that's been the case. Fast forward to this new amendment, which would allow states to waive out of key Obamacare protections like the ban on pre-existing conditions or the requirement to cover things like maternity care and mental health services. If congressional aides, and by the way, let me just add, mental health services are hugely important. You cannot overestimate how important those are. And so if you want to get out of one of the essential health benefits and not cover mental health services, including addiction services, it's a huge big deal. So if congressional aides lived in a state that decided to waive these protections, the aides who are sick could presumably be vulnerable to higher premiums than the aides who are healthy. The benefits package could get skimpier as Obamacare's essential health benefits requirement may no longer apply. This apparently does not sound appealing because the Republican amendment includes the members of Congress and their staff as a protected group who cannot be affected by this amendment's terms. And then they show where it says that. And then it happens to be, it's section 1312D3D, specified non-application provisions. In no case may a waiver for purposes of paragraph 1 apply with respect to any of the following provisions, extent that such sections applies to qualified health plans offered through the co-op, yada, yada, yada. And then it's sort of in there, but they didn't explain the way we did why they did that. I think we explained pretty well why they did that.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not even certain how this ends up playing in the Senate if they. I mean, they can't take it out of there now. It has to stay in there. Armando is objecting, on the other hand, to I guess another challenge to the bill. Although this thing is so convoluted and backwards and has backed its way into the bill, despite the wishes of the people who've written the bill, and we've explained why that is. But it may pose an interesting question of, as he's asking, a question of germaneness in the Senate.
Well, I think, we explained that at the beginning of the week.
Well, yeah.
The Byrd Rule says that you can't introduce stuff that the proper committee hasn't marked up. And the proper committee here is Homeland Security, because Homeland Security is responsible for benefits.
Now, as a result, you instead have a provision included in the bill designed to get around the jurisdictional challenge.
Right, and that's why it's there. That's why it's germane.
But it itself may pose the language getting around the jurisdictional challenge may itself pose a germaneness challenge. Is that what Amanda's asking?
How does exempting them somehow make it so it's not a Byrd Rule thing?
Well, no. He's asking how is the fix as a way around the Byrd Rule's third provision on jurisdiction makes sense on its face. The next question is including the fix language posing a new germaneness problem of which I guess is well,
that's why they're doing it separately, I thought.
The standalone bill, but the inclusion of this provision, I mean, this is a policy provision, of course, and the fact that they're only exempting themselves to get around a jurisdictional question, that may solve the jurisdictional question, but then the next question is, can you include this fix in this bill on germaneness grounds? That's a separate section of the Byrd Rule comes up as a question. It's a good one, easily, I think, dealt with by tabling the point of order, but still a good question under the rules. The fix language fixes the problem of, I need to have my sections in front of me. The third, as we recall from our discussion, there were 4 Byrd Rule exclusions. The
if it doesn't produce a change in outlays or revenues.
Germaneness.
It produces an outlay increase or revenue decrease when the instructed committee is not in compliance with the instructions. It's outside the jurisdiction of the committee that submitted the title or provision. That's where we're talking about the benefits here.
Yeah.
If it produces a change in outlays or revenues, which is merely incidental to the non-budgetary components of the provision.
Mm-hmm. And that may be what poses the issue. You can say, all right, this helps us with the jurisdictional problem, but falls victim to the germaneness problem. It is merely incidental to the impact on the budget here. You're only doing it to get around a germaneness problem or a jurisdictional problem, and that by itself isn't reason enough to include it in the bill, and that whole section may go. But if that section goes, that creates a jurisdictional problem which eats the whole bill. Mm-hmm. So it's a little complex. And something that they might have wanted to work out before, let's say, the day of the vote in the House.
Right. So if you think it's extraneous, then you get to object, and then it goes through the parliamentary games of whoever's in charge deciding what the rules are.
Yes. So we'll figure out who that is. Well, maybe. If
We
the
may wind up seeing it. We'll see.
Yeah, or the Senate may simply say, wow, we don't know how this will be affected by the Byrd rule, and until we do, we don't want to take any risks in taking it. It's going to tie up the Senate for a long time until we know what the Byrd rule outcome is, and why cast those votes if we don't have the opinion of the parliamentarian. And everyone will agree, okay, that's sort of sensible. It's the kind of caution the House refused to show in waiting or not waiting for the CBO score. So this is a good thing. And then the Senate just sits there and says, well, we're waiting for the Byrd ruling, and the House, after, let's say 3-4 weeks or 2 months, says, hey, how about that Byrd ruling, that Byrd ruling from the parliamentarian? What did she ever say about that? Oh, yes, good point. I forgot to ask her. We will definitely get to that. And then a couple weeks go by. Did you hear from the parliamentarian? I was going to call her, and I forgot, because the parliamentarian's not going to tell you without being asked. Suppose you just never ask.
Yeah, suppose you never did.
And you just say, well, I'm not going forward with this thing until we hear from the parliamentarian. Yeah, I know you keep saying that. When are you going to ask her? Oh, right. Separate question. I'm not going to ask her.
In due time.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yes, due time. So it's time for me to do something else right now. So yeah, I got to go.
Anyway,
that's
that's all that. I think it's all interesting. Armando also asked the other point, which we asked very, very early on. How do you even pass this thing if you don't have a CBO score? Because how can you determine that a CBO score says that it's deficit neutral? Because you don't know.
Right.
We mentioned that at the very, very beginning of the discussion, and I don't see how you get around that. But, again, I don't make the rules, they do.
Yeah, this may be why Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski are getting married. It may be it's a little-known provision, but I think it actually it helps with the revenues and is an acceptable substitute under the Constitution for a CBO score. We're just going to have this fantastic TV wedding, and then, I don't know, we all were just excited, and everybody drank a lot of champagne, and I don't know, we got the bill.
Right.
What happened?
Now, Move On claims that they've already made 30,000 calls on the AHCA this week alone.
Why don't they just move on?
And they're going to, along with everybody else, try to make sure that this really is, at least for some of these Republicans, a career-ending mistake. And Jamil Smith adds, and I think it's worth, just remembering, that if this passes, he says, never forget that it took making the American Health Care Act, AHCA, more cruel and fiscally irresponsible to secure additional Republican support. Which is true.
Yes.
You had to make it worse in order to get the Freedom Caucus.
You have to make it worse in order to make it the chances better that this worst thing would happen.
Right. And by the way, did you know that one of the targets in the House Health Bill is special ed?
I didn't until last night.
Yeah.
And
so basically, they want to take medical care away from special ed kids, in addition to taking it away from 24 million Americans in general.
Yeah. How do they do this?
How do they do this?
Yeah. Do you know?
Well, it's deep cuts to Medicaid.
Okay.
And that would affect 2,500 students. A lot of the Medicaid stuff that happens, don't forget, is elderly and nursing homes as well as special ed specific kids. It isn't just, all of those poor people who have different skin color than you.
Oh, yes. That was what they intended originally, but
most school districts rely on Medicaid. And a lot of the services that special ed kids need is very expensive. So disability kids all over the country are going to be profoundly affected by this. Remember, Medicaid is being cut by $880 billion. That's 25% over 10 years.
That sounds rather substantial.
And it imposes a per capita cap on funding for certain groups of people, like children and the elderly. And we just mentioned why the elderly. A dramatic change that would convert Medicaid from an entitlement designed to cover any costs incurred to a limited program.
Like a death panel, almost.
So an advocacy group for school superintendents estimates that school districts receive about $4 billion in Medicaid reimbursements annually, and 70% of districts reported they use the money to pay the salaries of healthcare professionals who serve special ed students.
You wouldn't have guessed off the top of your head necessarily, unless you were in that line of work, that this was the case. But I did see last night, late breaking news, it targets special needs education. That is, I mean, I guess maybe targets isn't the right word, but it certainly it brings things crashing down on their heads.
That's the title they used in the New York Times piece. A little notice target in the health bill, special ed. So you were allowed to use the word.
Only because I'm not allowed to fact check the New York Times, I guess.
Right. The National Alliance for Medicaid and Education estimates that 1% of all Medicaid reimbursement goes to local school districts. Even without the funding, school districts would be legally required to provide special education services. You know what that means? I live in a small town, and the biggest element in the budget, and we go to these New England town meetings to fight about this, is the school budget. So if you're legally required to provide special ed services, but now you're not getting the federal money, you got to raise your own taxes in order to cover that.
That's like a mandate for which there are no funds. What did they
You've
call
heard of those
things?
things, have you? And so, when that trickles down to people understanding what it's going to mean for them at the local level, I don't think it's going to go over all that well.
Well, so in 6, 7, 8 years, when people understand that, we'll be angry.
Well,
unless we
angry
do it
now by bringing it up now.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of
right.
making sure that Republican representatives have to eat this and own this.
Yeah. Well, it's a big job. I'm stuck now on the New York Times thing. If I were allowed to fact check them, I would have to write a both sides piece that says targeted is clearly. I think this is an incidental impact. To say it's targeted implies something entirely different, and I think this is an oversight as opposed to malice, aforethought, and therefore false foreplay.
Well, you don't have to get that technical about it. I think more general people on both sides appear to be upset about the new health care bill would suffice.
Okay, I guess maybe that would work. But had a Democrat said that it targeted special education, that would have earned them a pants on fire.
Right.
So I'm just I'm going to follow
but not
their...
in the New York Times, because they don't have a fact checker the way that Washington Post does.
They don't. What do they have? They have somebody.
They have the editor.
Okay.
Public editor who isn't particularly good.
Was it not the New York Times? I read early this morning, very early for me this morning. The report that that they were calling out Nancy Pelosi on this, that she was a big fat liar because she had lied about the number of children who were liable to lose their coverage under this bill by saying that up to 17 million could be affected, could lose their coverage. And apparently they decided that
the real number was 16.9.
Well, they said that this was a very confusing thing. If I read this correctly, the complaint was that that it was misleading for her to say 17 million because 17 million, you see, according to the report she cited, is the upper limit of the number of children who could lose health care. And in fact, the lower limit is only 4 million, and that's considerably lower than 17 million. And she said 17 million, as you can see in the following quote, where she says very clearly up to 17 million could lose it, therefore liar. Thank you.
Anyway, so that's what's going on. I think that there's a lot of things that could happen between this bill actually getting to a vote in the House today, passing, and then becoming law. But a lot of it's going to be pretty fascinating. There's stuff that should happen. There's stuff you'd look at it and say, I don't think this makes any sense. Why is this happening? But the bottom line is that I think this is a wonderful example, especially in the House, and we'll see about the Senate, of Republican governing philosophy, which is basically F you, we won.
Yes. Well,
we can do this. We're going to do this. We don't really care about any precedent. CBO, what's that? What do we care? And we don't really care whether or not you keep bringing up logical objections to policy that are in this bill, because this isn't really the final bill anyway. And besides, we haven't read it. And besides, who cares? We won.
Well, that makes things simple.
Yeah, it does. And it makes it complicated to fight it. So the best way to fight it is you won. We're going to make sure you lose.
Dang. Okay, we can make sure of that.
We'll work hard on that. Anyway, that's my summary for this morning, just to get you started. Thanks so much for listening. We didn't even touch the Comey stuff, but there's a pretty good Nate Silver piece that's called "The Comey Letter Probably Cost Clinton the Election, so why won't the media admit as much?" And the answer to that is because if they admit as much, they have to admit the way they covered it mattered. They covered 3 times as much email stuff as they did policy stuff, all of them. And so, they don't want to take responsibility for that. So the best way to do that is to accuse Clinton of not taking responsibility for her own loss. It must be all her fault.
That seems reasonable enough.
Because that's exactly the way they approached John McCain and Mitt Romney.
Yes.
And, with Clinton, it's that on steroids. So a very interesting piece by Nate Silver and well worth a read. And I would include that. John Dingell tweeted about the healthcare bill. House GOP leadership is walking their entire caucus off a cliff.
Yes.
Wait until the American people see the CBO score of this AHCH monstrosity. And Lauren Adler, who is an economist and associate director of the Schaefer Initiative for Innovation in Health Policy and also works at Brookings, said that, don't forget that this is, 24 million people who are going to be off insurance, and that's going to make a major big deal. There's a great piece here. The only first one I've seen, because it's all happening so fast. Jonathan Chait has something out here. The GOP healthcare bill is an abdication of responsibility and a moral disgrace.
It is both of those things. Just wait until the American people find out. I will wait. I'll wait. I'll try and help. Republican efforts to repeal Obamacare without a replacement failed, but they're attempting the next closest thing, a bill the party leadership will try to rush into law without the barest elements of due diligence. There have been no hearings, no studies, no Congressional Budget Office analysis, not even the text of a bill circulated the day before the vote. The heart of the bill is the same one that was polling under 20%, actually 17%, and failed 2 months ago, a near $1 trillion tax cut for wealthy investors financed by cuts to insurance subsidies for the poor and middle class. They've added a series of hazily defined changes, waivers for states to allow insurers to charge higher rates to people with pre-existing conditions, and to avoid covering essential health benefits and a pitifully small amount of money to finance high-risk pools for sick patients. What they're doing with that won't work. It's complete political cover. It is not policy. And the implications of the changes are vast. If a single state eliminated the cap on lifetime benefits for a single employee, employers in every state could actually follow suit, thus bringing back a horrid feature of the pre-Obamacare system in which people who get hit with expensive treatment suddenly discover their insurer will no longer pay for their care. And that would affect not only those getting insurance with Medicaid at the state exchanges, but also through their jobs. So the ambiguity is the strategy. They're rushing through a chamber of Congress a bill reorganizing 1/5 of the economy, or 1/6, depending upon how you measure it, without even cursory attempts to gauge its impact. Its budgetary impact is as yet unknown, to Armando's point as to how you can bring this to the Senate and say it's okay with the Byrd rule because it's revenue neutral. How the heck do you know? The same is true of its social impact. Through the broad strokes are clear enough. Millions of Americans will lose access to medical care, and tens of thousands of them will die. And Congress is understandably eager to hasten these results without knowing them more precisely. Their haste and secrecy are a way of distancing the House Republicans from the immorality of these actions. And of course, you could look at this and fact check this and say, you said tens of thousands of them will die when it's really nines of thousands. Or 11s.
Right? And millions of Americans will lose access to medical care. The estimate is 24 million. But what if it's 23.6? You're now no longer qualified to discuss this because you got everything wrong. The big picture is so clear. You don't need those details to know what's going on here.
Well, good.
Sorry about the outrage, but it's pretty outrageous.
It is. Don't be sorry about that. It's just unbelievable.
By the way, these are my patients.
Yes. And your neighbors. So,
and my neighbors. Yeah. And, and again, just the mental health part of it is just so big. I just never want to forget that part. It's awfully important.
It is. There's almost
addiction
no way
services, all the stuff that they, made lip service to, they're gutting.
Yes. Surprise.
That's
what they do.
That's because they're incompetent and you're stupid. So good luck with that.
Yes,
and I think I'll sign off with that, and we'll see what happens today.
Yes. We have a pretty good guess, but it would be much better, by the way, if it just died today. I think they might try and come back again, but let them do this all year long. Just keep failing. That's fine. I know there's actually a school of thought out there that says, well, the best thing, if you can engineer it with certainty, which is the problem, you can't, a narrow passage that you can lay on the shoulders of lay across the shoulders of Republicans and tar them with it in the next election, only to then see it fail in the Senate and not become law, so that the horrible effects aren't brought to bear, but the political price is paid in the House would be the best thing.
That's true, but somebody else also pointed out, which I have to agree with, that Democrats are not trying to engineer this. In other words, it may be better politically for Democrats if this passes the House, but Democrats don't want it to pass the House because it's bad policy. And that there is the difference between Democrats and Republicans.
I guess that's true. If you find that there are Democrats voting for it because and rubbing their hands together with glee, not because they agree with the bill, but because they can't wait for the political fallout, well, that would be problematic. But you're not going to see a whole hell of a lot of that. And you're probably going to see zero. If you're on board with this one, it's because you want it. And that probably applies to Republicans too, although there's certainly some more political calculation going on that side in this thing.
Right.
But,
so I'm going to excuse myself and leave because basically I could be outraged all day about this.
You could, and
probably
will be. You just do it somewhere else.
Exactly right. So this is great work, and speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. Thanks so much for listening this morning. And David will be back tomorrow, Friday, and I'll be back Monday, and we'll see if we're still all alive.
Yes, okay. Oh, it's
Take
Mika
care.
with the invitation. Go get that. Very good. Thanks, Greg. We'll catch up with your outrage on Monday when we know what happened, even though we won't know how much it costs or would have cost had it should it fail. It is. I mean, it's just sort of one of those unbelievable things that there's really possibly a majority of members of Congress in the House anyway, willing to vote for a bill about which they know next to nothing, with this broad of an impact, and possibly, well, I don't know, let's say the destruction of everything we've ever worked for over the past 50 years or so, and now find ourselves all losing our insurance and not only back to square one, but perhaps worse off than we were before, because some of us at least had employer-provided health insurance in a state that required that we be covered in decent fashion, and then we may lose that along the way as well. Let's see. I just paused on a Jonathan Chait tweet in response to a Josh Krashour tweet. Hotline, Josh. Let me see. Just grab my attention here for a second. Josh had said many of the Republican-leaning districts where Trump is unpopular are also the affluent seats where rolling back Obamacare regulations are more popular. Where Trump is unpopular. Yeah, I guess that would be. And then Chait asking, are eliminating essential health benefits and protections for pre-existing conditions remotely popular anywhere? That's a hell of a question. And I don't know the answer to that. I would suspect no. However, all right, let's see. A couple of comments along the way here. Michael Musson saying, we need to convince Trump that the AHCA will ruin his show's ratings for the current season and get him to veto it. That's a possibility. It's entirely likely he might even buy into that. I also I note here another method of noting the hypocrisy of all this, widely shared here, in this case, John Wunderlich sharing this one. Republicans under Boehner promising transparency in the House for years. There was lots of circulation of clips from Boehner and many other prominent Republicans insisting, this back in 2010, we can't go forward with this. You got to read the bill. We have to know what's in it. And of course, Greg addressed a lot of that earlier. But this clip here from 2009, as a matter of fact. But in addition to the specific objections to the Affordable Care Act and the procedure under which it was being passed, there were also specific promises from Republicans that they would never, ever, 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 ever in a million years do something like this. But that's excluded under the umbrella of mere puffery, as they teach you in contracts law, I guess. You just these promises that get made that we're going to do things differently, rather ridiculous, really almost from either party. Although I will say that I do find that in general, Democrats find it more uncomfortable to break those pledges. Though break them they do, they feel more uncomfortable. That's not much to hang your hat on. Well, at least Democrats feel more uncomfortable when they do this. That doesn't help very much. All right. Let's see. I guess, Armando also now suggesting, and Armando, by any, if you're interested in discussing things, you are by all means invited to join us to do so. But he's saying here, Senate Dems will need to brush up on all their delaying tactics in order to build up opposition to the AHCA and give us, I guess, as much time as possible to build up the groundswell of outrage about it, which, given the facts, ought to be a relatively simple thing to do. I guess the only question is whether or not Democrats find that job falls to them. It's very possible, not because Senate Republicans are fantastic, upstanding people, but because they are certainly more cautious people, and also some procedural issues are raised in the Senate that are going to be very difficult to reconcile unless you wait. That is, unless you wait, say, for a CBO score or some kind of some kind of evidence that you'd be able to bring to the parliamentarian that says that this bill meets Byrd rule restrictions for the 10-year budgeting window, and how you do that without CBO numbers or without somebody's numbers, I have no idea, except if you simply decide, well, we're just going to say it does, and sheer force of will can make these things happen, but there has to be the will, and that's the big question mark. Does Mitch McConnell care what the non-passage of this bill does to Trump? Does he think it helps? He may say, look, not voting on this thing in the Senate, certainly not at this point, is a win-win. You're killing yourselves, and you'd kill us, and so I'm happy to win by not killing ourselves, but I'm saving you. And I firmly believe that this is what the House had in mind, was our not taking this bill up. Certainly not anything like in this form. You may have hoped for us to come up with an alternative version in the Senate and do it fast and then hand it back to you in the House, but I don't know how possible that is. This is very likely that the Senate simply says, yes, the outrage and the calls from our constituents that say we at the very least can't go forward with this without knowing what the budgetary impact is 100% right. I grant that to you. We are going to meet your demands on that. We're not going forward until the CBO tells us what the score is on this, and we're not going forward until we know from the parliamentarian whether or not this thing can even reach the floor in this form. And they just simply don't ask the parliamentarian. The CBO can go ahead and do its own work. They don't have to be asked, I don't believe, in order to score this thing. They just simply, they need a draft. And that's not there yet either. But it may very well be that Republicans, the delaying is taken care of by the self-interest of Republicans facing re-election, or just, even those not facing re-election for some time, just saying, man, I hate those idiots in the House. I don't want to touch their bill. I never wanted to touch their bill. They didn't even want to touch their bill. So I'm just not going to. And they may start from scratch and design their own, and they might take up the House bill and substitute its text entirely for their own. They may just let that one die. They may take up some other House bill that has nothing whatsoever to do with the with healthcare and insert their text there. Although actually, then they need to use reconciliation on that. That might pose a problem. Well, that adds a new wrinkle to it. Well, why don't I ask Armando, who's now joined us, to chime in?
Yeah, I think that's, I actually asked a similar question. I mean, what are the Senate Republicans? I don't think they really care about this AHCA business. If it became law, I don't think they're concerned about it from a human standpoint. They're concerned about it politically, and I think the general consensus would be that it would be a net negative for them politically. At least I think that's a fairly sound political conclusion. I think. I mean, I hope so anyway. But it certainly seems that way when you look at polling on what they're proposing, at least as reported. As you said, we haven't seen the bill. So sure, I guess I see what you're saying, and I thought of that too. They could just lay it all on the Byrd rule. I said, my hands are tied. I can't do anything until we get a score and so on and so forth. So, for example, let's say you wait for a score. The bill passes out of the House today.
Yeah.
And McConnell says, well, we can't really do anything until we get a score, and that takes 10 days. In those 10 days, the drum beats presumably will be strong, protesting it once we know details. And I'm sure there are a lot of details that we haven't discovered yet that are really egregious beyond the ones we already know. So it's not going to get better for the AHCA once it passes. It's going to get worse, I think.
Yes, it's very unlikely that anything not yet publicly, widely shared with the public that's in the bill is a good thing. Like, you wouldn't be hiding Easter eggs in there for people to find and say, oh, well, there is this provision for free pizza for a year from Papa John's for everybody, isn't it? And even though I don't like Papa John's, it is free pizza, and that's a good thing. You would bring that to the fore and say, we put this in here as a sweetener. You don't hide sweeteners. So anything that's still left to be found is likely to be something that they were hoping you would never see.
I think there's a couple of other intervening events that'll be interesting. I mean, we're talking about procedure, and I think they might wait. They also, I guess, could just submit to the committees. I mean, as I recall, when the Democrats did it, Nancy Pelosi passed a bill, and that was all well and good. I guess it passed in November or December. I forget the exact date of 2009. Max Baucus didn't care. He was still working on his bill.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have cooperative Senate members, and I guess people just haven't guessed that was the case because we're so party-oriented, and in many cases there's a working partnership between Republicans in the House and Senate, and likewise Democrats. But we've seen this happen fairly often, and it's one of the reasons the two houses really hate one another at heart, even though then the House members then run to join the Senate, usually to undo the backwardness, as they see it, of the Senate. But if there's no agreement to tie this anvil around the necks of Senate Republicans, and I don't see that there is one, then forget the CBO, forget the Byrd rule. As soon as the bill arrives in the Senate, they say, okay, as we would with any other legislation, let us now refer this to the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and the Finance Committee and see what they think.
Right. Okay, we're here at the Senate. We have our process, and indeed the process would be, right, normally, refer to committees and let the committee come out with whatever it's going to come out. I mean, I always remember Reid, and I don't know if this was common, but it seemed common. He would take some innocuous House bill that got passed on post offices or something. Mm-hmm. He would, blank it out and write his own tax bill because that's how he would meet the revenue bill originating from the House requirement of the Constitution.
Yes. I'm amazed that works. But
what?
I'm still amazed that works. I don't know why say, for instance, the judges who are willing to touch this thing in the first place didn't say, I get what you're after, but at least, do me this favor.
If you had a revenue bill.
Right. Take a House revenue bill and change it. You can't do it with a post office bill. Come on.
I
don't know why that works.
You're right. I mean, that's a clear constitutional breach that been happening now for 100 years or however long it's been happening. So nobody cares. And in a certain way, we've amended the Constitution because we decided that's a stupid provision of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And I think it is a stupid provision of the Constitution, to be perfectly honest. But, we know what their original intent was. Yes. They wanted the House to raise revenue, and this has historical precedent. They didn't want, it goes back to the notion of Parliament constraining the king on revenue measures. And that's, Cromwell's entire revolution was.
Yes. All of which is true. And I guess now that the Senate is popularly elected, that's as dumb as anything.
Yeah. No, I mean, I understand why they ignore it.
Yeah.
But it's not as if we don't know what the founders intended.
Right.
We do. And we're basically just blatantly violating it.
Oh.
But anyway, as an aside to this particular piece, you throw it through the normal committees. That's going to take time.
Ooh,
right?
As a matter, it would definitely, I mean, it doesn't have to, but it certainly can if they wanted to. So here's, I guess now I'm trying to think, this bill, since it didn't get voted on the first time, they can, they can solve a problem. I mean, I don't want to discuss it. Don't listen. Republicans, close your ears. Refer it to the Homeland Security Committee and let them deal with
that's funny.
With the exemption for Congress, and then they don't have to have a freestanding bill. They just take that out or deal with it in another way.
That's true. Instead, we'll just propose a new bill that doesn't have all this.
So yes, all the objections to it, or the possibility of killing the bill in its entirety over jurisdictional objections, only works if there's an enthusiastic Republican conference in the Senate that wants to pass this bill as written as quickly as possible. And there's, I guess, nobody who wants it as written, and I don't know if there's anybody who wants it fast.
Enthusiastic and near unanimous. Remember,
yes.
They only have 52. They can only lose 3 votes.
Yes. I mean, only Ted Cruz.
Even if they qualify into reconciliation, which, again, I don't see how that actually happens.
For the entire thing, no. And very often, it's a fairly common thing on a reconciliation bill to have significant parts of it lost to the bird rule. Happens a lot. They make this mistake a lot, and that's because the terms are unclear and undefined and nebulous, and depends on who's the parliamentarian and how big the majority is. All of these things are real factors, which really suggests that it's not really much of a rule, but what can you do? I mean, Byrd wasn't under any illusions, I don't think, about the partisan nature of things. And
he was under some illusions of weirdness. Byrd he was kind of a weird duck, but leaving that aside.
I guess that's true. It's not entirely clear that he had an understanding of where the Senate would land now. And even in the last couple of years of his service, he was still kind of like, when it came to questions of changing the rules, nuclear option, and even just straight up reform of the filibuster, not elimination of it, were still anathema to him, because he believed that it produced, that the existence of the filibuster produced compromise, when the last 10 years of his service had made it pretty clear that at this point it does not. But he was, I don't remember the last 10 years. I remember my first 10, though, and then in those days it did.
Well, what's interesting about it is it was almost his first 10 years, if I can remember correctly, the filibuster just wasn't an issue. It wasn't really used. I guess it was there, I guess is the argument.
Yes.
And that's where it's compromised.
Yeah.
I thought that he thought that there were many more institutionalists who were going to defend the body. And I think,
and there were then.
I want to just raise one more thing with you on Senate tactics. Suppose they really did want to jam it through.
Yeah.
And with everything in it. My understanding, tell me if you disagree, is even if they nuked the filibuster, that wouldn't solve their problem, because the filibuster for this type of question, germaneness, reconciliation on budget issues, is codified. It's in a law. They would have to repeal the law in the Budget Act.
Yes, or
right?
hope that no one was willing to enforce it in court. They could just procedurally just say, well, the law does say this, but raise your hand if you don't give a crap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 51. Okay. We don't give a crap. Move forward. Let's go. and pass the bill, and then just cross your fingers that judges say, "Yeah, that's a political issue. I'm not touching it," which is a possibility. But
it's in a law that's written into the law. I mean, if you can't touch something that's a law,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you could find such a judge. You'd have to be really lucky to get that one guy.
I mean,
and on
that's
appeal,
a law
it would
issue.
be
I mean,
very
come
difficult.
on.
Yeah. Right. You know, I mean, you could have somebody who would be willing to close their eyes and ears and say the prerogative in the Senate, it's up to them. They decide what their procedural rules are going to be, even
unless and until they
them.
codify it in a law.
Yes. Well, I would say that too. And we'd be left, you know how this sometimes goes. The judge just says, bah,
yeah, no,
enough.
Yeah.
And then,
I agree with you. I just think that there's no cognizable argument. Listen,
right. Which is why we have the appeal
argument.
system, and then you would win then. And then, and then Trump would say, "I'm breaking up and he'd be outraged about it. I don't know,
the circuit
the
of
Sixth
whatever
Circuit.
Yeah, I mean, but that's another hurdle for them. It seems to me that look, all this, from what I've heard reported, I've seen too many things that are just the piece that's relaxing the restrictions on private insurance plans from private employers on pre-existing conditions. That's not germane. That's regulatory. That's not budgetary in any way. That doesn't impact the government's budget. There's no way that passes the Byrd test.
Yeah, not likely. I mean, we did discuss that at some length about a week ago, and it's very difficult to see how it fits. But there is the outlier out there. Arguments have been made, and
I know argument. Listen, you can argue anything. I'm just
right.
talking within the bounds of reasonableness. When you live in a dictatorship, of course, they can rewrite anything, and it says, well, it's, what I say goes, and that's it. And, I'm not saying that it's not a strong possibility. I'm a legal realist, as with regard to courts, they figure out what the result they want. But we do have certain constraints on that. And it's just, as you said, they say, well, it's a political question, this Byrd rule. Oh, it's in the Budget Act? Yeah, it's still a political question.
Right.
I
don't know.
I guess that's the way out. But again,
Right.
that presupposes a strong desire in the Senate, Republicans, with near unanimity. Again, they cannot lose 3. They lose 3, they lose everything. Right?
Right.
So the bill isn't going to be the same. I mean, Susan Collins will ask for something because she'll be concerned, and then she'll come up with something. Right?
Yes.
The guys.
I want you to close Planned Parenthood, but leave the door unlocked.
There's got to be a couple of senators who, Heller, I guess, would be one who don't like the look of it and say, well, I don't like this. And by and large, just common sense politically. For 7 years, repeal and replace was what they offered. And it was mostly repeal. I can't even remember nobody ever looked at the laws because they never were going to pass. But they were passing things by near unanimous votes on repeal and replace when it didn't matter.
Right.
Now, if you pass something, it's going to matter.
Yes. Or what we used to call freebie votes.
Right.
You couldn't
Exactly.
tell where people stood based on these things because it was a free pass. It was a political vote so that you could not be accused of not being on board, or you would be able to deflect rhino accusations, but no danger of actually hurting anybody. Yeah. Although, in the long term, by the way, all you people who thought you weren't hurting anybody with these things, you've hurt everybody, because now we're so used to the idea that you idiots would vote for such things. You feel stuck voting for it. Some of them I think, oppose this thing in general, but say, there's nothing I can do. I'm Republican, and I've been voting for repeal and replace since forever. And in their mind, the political question is, do I vote consistently with my position on health care and risk throwing millions of my constituents into medical bankruptcy and death, and lose votes that way. Or
Here's it.
Yeah.
Let me just break into you something
Okay.
here, and I think it's a very interesting quote. Joe Manchin, quote, "I can't say the AHCA is dead on arrival in the Senate, but they don't have 60 votes, so it's dead on arrival."
Okay.
So Joe Manchin has said this doesn't get through the Byrd rule.
Yes.
He thinks the entire thing is subject to the Byrd rule, that it's going to require 60 votes.
Yes. Or
I don't know if he's thought it through, if he's looked at it.
That's the problem.
And I'm not sure that isn't what Republican senators quietly are hoping for, that someone just says, and this says, remember they fired the parliamentarian that one time, and I forget what it was about. You know the story, you've told it so many times.
Oh.
It was about taxes, I believe.
Yeah. Yes. As I recall, the firing that I'm thinking of anyway was, over Byrd rule difficulties for the 2003 tax cuts.
I believe I think you and I have the same recollection. They wanted that. They wanted it bad.
Yeah.
Because, the reality is you can say anything you want about the Republicans, but they are for tax cuts always, 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 and will move heaven and earth to get a tax cut.
Yes.
They are absolutely ideologically and consistent on that. So they wanted that. So they fired the parliamentarian who ruled against them, right?
Yeah.
Here, don't you think they want the parliamentarian to rule against them? Please rule against us. So we can just go back and say, oh, well, we tried.
I mean, I think so. Yeah. That's my guess. That's what they would prefer. Because they say, and they'll more strongly prefer it the louder we protest in the coming days. Yeah, I think they don't want anything to do with it. If they can get away with not having to vote on this or be able to use it as an excuse for writing their own bill, that would be great for them.
I think so too. I think Nate Cohn makes an interesting point. It is a bit surprising that they're going through with this today. I understand maybe it's something internal for Ryan that he needs it to keep control of his caucus somehow, to the degree that he has any control. There must be other motivations, because listen, I don't want to be sanguine. Anything can happen. It's possible the Senate will pass it. In the era of Trump, we've all come not to be overconfident, but I just don't see how it passes. The Senate. So you're taking this vote. And generally speaking, as the 72 repeal and replace votes didn't hurt these guys because nothing happened. No one even examined what they were voting for. But you get the feeling this is different. And you look at Randy Mast, who is the congressman from the district where I have a place in Florida. He won by about 7-8 points. I don't think this is a good bill for him. I think he's going to be hammered on this for a year in the lead up to the re-election campaign in 2018. And he's a one-term congressman. He just got elected for the first time. He's got a great personal story. He lost his legs, and that's a terrible story, but you know what I mean. It was it's good politics that he lost his legs in Afghanistan, and he was a soldier. All these things. Seems like it, has a good family story, all these other things. But, Florida's Florida. And when you start talking healthcare, it looks like you're going after Medicare and Medicaid and nursing homes and everything else. It's just not a good vote for him. But they're going to do it.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're going to pass it.
I guess so. Yeah. You can't tell. Exactly. But normally they don't bring things like this to the floor unless they are pretty sure. But they have been threatening for days. And I think they may have even moved the last votes necessary by saying, well, we're actually going to risk it. We're going to bring it to the floor, whether we get your answer or not. And you answer us on television in front of everybody, whether or not you're a rhino or what. And that might have moved. It's not a bad tactic if you're willing to run the risk. I guess if you're not doing anything else and everything is a train wreck, you might get away with that one from time to time and just say, I need 3 more votes. And you guys are well known as the holdouts, and we're just going to put it on TV, and I'll let everybody know ahead of time, if this bill goes down, these are the 3 people who did it. Some people will hail them as heroes, but, as far as you winning your primary next time, well, in the Republican Party, that's where they are. They actually think that they'll lose if, some of them think they'll lose their primaries if they don't vote for it. Others are more obsessed with losing the general election if they do. But everybody's mileage varies. By the way, Senate parliamentarian Robert Dove, who we were talking about, he was removed in 2001, and not directly over the 2001 tax cuts in the reconciliation bill, but an accumulation of unfavorable rulings that led to his removal in 2001. By the way, rather than the 2003 round, he was already gone for that one, which I guess is how they did it again in 2003. But the Wikipedia entry tells us that it was actually a convoluted series of rulings that led to Trent Lott, the American hero Trent Lott, firing the parliamentarian of the Senate and replacing him with, by all other accounts, a pretty decent parliamentarian who wasn't a joke, Alan Fruman.
But he gave the right answer on that one, didn't he?
Yes. But,
so how great was he exactly?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to live that down. I mean, if that's all you're really there for.
It's impossible to live it down, David.
Yeah.
It's impossible to live it down. Just listen, the optics of it. Listen, they didn't like the answer. The other guy, who I probably, even if you honestly disagreed with him, they just fired him because he gave the wrong answer. You can't take the job there.
By the way, and for those of you wondering, well, who was this liberal firebrand Robert Dove? The answer is he wasn't one. He was, prior to his role as parliamentarian, a Dole staffer for some 8-10 years on the staff of Bob Dole's office.
Yeah, and people will say, well, yeah, sure, but if it was a Democrat who did it, you'd be, oh, well, that's great. I like to think I wouldn't, but that doesn't even make me wrong now. That would have made me wrong when I did that. You know what I mean? People always say, oh, well, when you do it, it's okay. No, I don't really think that's true. Say what you want about Democrats. Bare-knuckled isn't that.
That's true. It takes an awful long time to get them around to this. But if you
Reid was as close as it came to a bare-knuckled.
Yeah. Yes. And it took
forever. It took him years to get there.
Yes. I know. I tried to push him there. I'm wrong. I'm a hypocrite. I was very active hypocrite for many years trying to get him to do this.
It's funny because I'll never forget that call when he got mad at you for telling him you need to be tougher. I wonder if he remembers.
No. He deals with that all the time.
But, I know, but I just wonder because, that bastard David.
Yeah, right. Well, one, he doesn't remember. His staff remembered for a while. That's their job to remember. And those of you who wonder about questions of access journalism, isn't it true that members of the press don't do this because they're worried about their access? Yes, it is. Because I lost my access for years. And I had to do the entire filibuster reform effort through proxies.
But you know what's funny about that, though?
Besides
I think you were better for it, in a way. And it's an interesting, listen, this is going way off the rails, but.
Sure, why not?
It just goes to show you knew more about it, frankly, than anybody. Everybody came to hear what you said about it. And sure, other people would start echoing you later, but the work you did on it was in some ways better because you were like, look, I'm going to tell you when you're doing what I think you're doing wrong and why. It's not like you were unfair to the guy and said you're a horrible human being. I said, you're just mistaken here. This is the story. And yeah, I understand it would have been nicer to have the access, but I'm not sure it impacted your work in a negative way.
I didn't have that much access, so I guess it wasn't that much.
Well, you could call them up and they'd take your call and they'd explain things to you. And then they stopped doing that, presumably.
Yes, and stopped inviting me to those calls, but they tended not to yield very much. So it wasn't a huge loss. And I'm not a reporter, and it didn't matter for me. I didn't have to file stories daily, so the punishment didn't hurt a great deal. So I don't know. So maybe for an access journalist, a guy who needs quotes, I mean that's deadly. For me, it wasn't, but they didn't know what else to do with me because they were like, I don't know what's a blogger. I guess I don't know. He's writing stories. I see that there's a written product. I guess if we treat him like a reporter, he'll be angry if we cut off his access.
Yeah, it didn't work.
No.
But you say that though. I mean, you think of that justification. I need quotes. What good is a quote? I mean, a quote that says nothing, blather, a lie.
Right now, at this point, you could just make it up. And who could gainsay you for saying President Trump said he was actively looking at it? What? No, he didn't. Well,
I've got an interview with Donald Trump. An interview with Donald Trump is actually worthwhile. I will say that, and for journalistically, not to the public. Because he has no filter and he says stupid things all the time. So if you get to ask him a question, frankly, on anything, there's literally not a thing that he won't make a fool of himself on. It's kind of shocking. You figure he might know one or two or three things.
No.
But he doesn't know one thing.
He does not.
He answers a question on anything and it's a joke. I mean, it's still stunning he's the president.
George Will said that today, or maybe
he's
yesterday.
Right. Yeah, George Will wrote that said, listen, what were we kidding here? This guy's a moron.
Basically.
Who doesn't even understand what not being a moron means.
That was the gist of the piece. Came under the title yesterday, I guess. Last night. So it'll be being read by print newspaper readers this morning. Trump has a dangerous disability. The upshot of which is it's not that he doesn't know things. It's not even that he doesn't know things. It's that he doesn't know what it is to know a thing.
Exactly. That's actually a very good sentence from Will.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know what knowledge actually is.
Yeah.
Does knowledge
kind of
matter?
Embarrassing.
Would be an interesting question. But the fact is that everything he's tried to do has generally been stymied except for Gorsuch. And that's a big if, don't get me wrong, but he didn't really do it. McConnell did it. I mean, they gave him a list of people. He closed his eyes, pointed at one, and they got the guy through.
Right.
McConnell did.
Yes.
That's McConnell's achievement.
In his first 100 days.
They gave Trump a list. He pointed at one name on the list, and that was that. That's all he's done. Everything else, thank God for now, until today, he's basically failed. He did do that Tomahawk strike or whatever. I don't know if it was Tomahawks. It was cruise missiles, I guess. I don't know if that's the same thing.
They are cruise missiles.
And
I don't know if
that didn't. It was bad, and I don't mean to minimize it, but how is Syria different today? Because of that,
right?
We're $90 million poorer in terms of our missiles.
Sunk costs, the economists tell us. But go on.
Okay, and he tried these EOs, even this religious liberty EO.
You can't return the missiles, is what I'm saying.
Have I don't know if you touched on the religious liberty executive order today. Not
today. Greg mentioned it, and Joan mentioned it yesterday, that it was coming up.
Yeah, I looked at it. It doesn't do anything.
So will that be the defense in court?
It would have to be, because that's the truth. It doesn't do anything. It says, to the extent possible, IRS, use your discretion to not pick on religious groups who engage in political action.
Yes.
There isn't that much discretion, though. The law's pretty clear if it's a violation.
They could, however, announce that thousands and thousands of churches are under audit now to make sure that they're not violating the law, and then 6 months later say, we've found that they aren't, but sorry for the last 6 months. So there's going to be some rogue IRS examiners out there likely who are saying, I am enforcing the executive order. I did, after all, find that they were not in violation of the Internal Revenue Code. It took me a while. So I recommend that path, just in case you're listening at the IRS. you would be in compliance with both the law and the executive order. And in fact, I don't know how you can comply with this executive order without putting more people under audit to prove that you're complying with it.
Yeah, I guess my point being, it's not dissimilar to our discussion earlier. He could have called that. Well, actually, he's not supposed to contact the IRS, is he?
Call the National Park Service and tell them, go over to the IRS.
Isn't there a rule? I mean, actually, now that I think about it,
you may be right. It sounds like a good one. If there isn't one,
I think there might be a problem with this executive order. I hadn't thought about that. Is this something that's the president is permitted to do under law?
Like, can he communicate that to them? I suppose he's got to be able to say something to somebody.
I'm not sure
about how he wants the IRS to operate. I want you to obey the law.
It's worth. Well, no, it's basically use your discretion and see how you could not obey the law.
Yes, that's it. But if you couldn't communicate with them at all, I mean, well, I don't know. I'm not sure what the rule is, but yeah, his idea, of course, is I would like you to ignore what's in the law to the extent possible, which is to say, not at all. But I'm not certain. I don't know. Maybe he's not supposed to. But that would be real fun.
I'd have to look it up. You know what? I'm flying a little blind there. I thought there were some restrictions on that.
File your suit anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it says here, the President Trump to weaken IRS rule against church political activity. That's the Associated Press.
Yeah. But no.
He
but you've read
can't actually do it that way, first of all. And then there's this question. He's asking the IRS to use, quote, maximum enforcement discretion over the regulation known as the Johnson Amendment, which applies to churches and nonprofits. Now, the IRS rule is not the law. The law is the Johnson Amendment, which I believe, I'm not an expert on the Johnson Amendment, but it was when, I believe it was Lyndon Johnson, when he was a congressman. Not even a senator. I believe he was still a congressman, so I think that's 1954. No, it was Senator Johnson. Was put into force and prohibited partisan political activity for churches and other tax-exempt organizations. So that's still a law. I mean, he can't tell them not to enforce the law. Maybe he can. I guess that if I bring a case in El Paso, maybe Judge Hainan will have a problem with this. Who knows? You may not know what I'm talking about.
I don't think I recognize the name.
Judge Hainan was the guy who said that Obama couldn't tell INS not to what things to prosecute, what things to prioritize in prosecution.
I see. Okay, yeah, well, then that's the guy you're looking for. You just ask him to be consistent.
Yeah, it's a done deal. Corbella's going to vote for it, it looks like.
Okay.
He says he's undecided, but he's now using recycled talking points he used when he backed the last bill. It would change in the Senate. Okay. I'm voting for this. This is not going to be the final bill.
Right.
All right.
Well, sometimes you vote to move the process forward, and rarely does the bill ever come back from the Senate in the same way. So in some sense, everything can be, though this can be said of any bill, although usually, you're going to fight for your position in conference or in whatever negotiations go on between the House and the Senate. But in this case, the House is going to send it off knowing it's going to be changed as usual, but rooting for that change. Please save us from ourselves. Take out the whole thing. Or don't vote on it at all. And a lot of House members will be okay with that too. And the freebie position for them among with their Tea Party base will be to say, the Tea Party base will ask them to write to the Senate to pressure them to take up the bill, and they will. And then, behind the scenes, they'll say, please, for God's sake, don't take up this bill. So that's, I think, how that
I guess, but he's still going to have to defend it. Dude. I mean, I'm actually curious about his political calculation on this because it's not going to help him get reelected.
And who are we talking about again?
Carlos Corbello. He's a Republican out of Miami, in a swingy district in the sense that Democrats have won there in recent years. He beat Joe Garcia last time by about 7 or 8. Mm-hmm. But he ran, fairly moderate. This is obviously not moderate.
Right.
It's not helpful to him. I would have thought that he would have been someone who they would have only called on if they needed his vote. And the fact is, if they need Corbella's vote, I would have figured it's really a 1 or 2 vote margin then.
Well, is it the sort of thing that...
I mean, I could be wrong, but I think he would have been one of the last ones.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the sort of... I often wonder about the relationship between statewide Florida Republican Party officials and kingmakers there, and Donald Trump being a sort of a part-time Floridian, and certainly an awful lot of money that powers Florida politics, I would have to guess, comes out of the Palm Beach circuit, the cocktail circuit. And I wonder whether they lean on people and like maybe who are nominal or
he's not really
Republicans.
There's no real threat from the right though. In his district, he's not going to get primary.
No, I mean they can't just say you're kind of expendable. We'll just find us a Republican in your district who'll do this.
No, it's Miami. I don't think that calculation works here for him. I don't know what he's thinking. Maybe he's looking to have more influence in the party.
Oh, yeah, okay, could be. I want one of those Marco Rubio credit cards. Can I get one of those?
Yeah, he would have one of those.
Can.
He's from the Rubio world. Just so you know, he's
that's
very close to Rubio.
So that he needs a boat.
Yeah. So it's an interesting.
If you're looking to sell your boat, advertise in what district? Florida's 7th. Yeah.
As a lot of people said, look, taking the chances here of this thing passing is too great. You want it to fail.
Yes, please.
But if you could build a world where this passes by 1 or 2 votes, and the Senate doesn't move it at all,
yes. And we hope that they won't, but. That is awfully dangerous. I was saying about it yesterday, like, oh yeah, well, sure, this bill, it's crazy. Sure, it could survive the primary, but it'll never make it past the general election in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought it'd get past the primary.
Right.
So I was wrong from beginning to end. I thought he'd drop before Iowa, because I actually thought the tax return issue would be bigger, which shows how stupid I am.
We are.
To ever listen to me.
Sorry, a bit out of touch on that one. Yeah.
I'm totally out of touch. I could not believe the tax return issue did not sink him.
Well, you had 40 years of history behind you and an incredible amount of damage done to Mitt Romney with it. You weren't wrong until you were. All right. Donald Trump.
And I do think the media has a lot to answer for. On that particular point, I don't know how they can defend themselves.
No, they don't.
Well, we said he didn't give it. No, you should have been hammering him.
Hillary Clinton is not accepting responsibility for the failure of this tax returns issue, and I don't know why.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably
that
because
was all
of her
her
emails.
fault because she released all her tax returns. See, now, if you think about it, if she had not released her tax returns, it would have been a huge issue, and it would have affected Trump, and we could have gotten him. So she did. It really was her fault for Trump, because if she would not have released her tax returns,
she shouldn't have.
Yeah,
she was trying to eliminate an issue, just as arguably with the email server. Well, I'm trying to eliminate a stupid issue by allowing people to get my emails, but I've stepped into another issue. That would have been interesting, though. To say, I'll release them when he releases them. His are, much more interesting anyway.
Yeah, she did it with the speeches, but of course they ended up coming out anyway because of WikiLeaks. But she tried to do the same. She tried to draw that line in the sand. Listen, that's a calculation I would have made. Who would have thought that not releasing your tax returns was going to be okay?
Who would have thought not understanding anything, not knowing what the nuclear triad is, saying, I don't know what my health care plan is going to be, but it's going to be terrific. Who would have thought any of that would fly?
Well, they'll say, we covered it, but you didn't cover it the way you were supposed to cover it. You should have been outraged. You should have said, this is not acceptable. There should have been front page editorials every day that said this. Listen, by September, October, yes, you can't vote for Donald Trump. On the editorial pages, I'm talking about, just generally, it's like, look, in France, they're covering Le Pen like they should have covered Trump. That it would be a catastrophe to the country. Hindsight. What?
They have the benefit of hindsight.
To having seen it. Yeah. That's true, too. I mean, I don't know how they covered her in 12, but she wasn't as close. She didn't make the runoff in 12, so I guess that's the argument. But What can you say? Anyway, so this passes, and I think now you're really, it's Schumer's got to be good at this.
Yes, if he hasn't got an ally unwittingly or
with McConnell,
unwillingly.
Yeah. McConnell
anyway.
has been strangely silent. He really doesn't even comment on these things.
He's busy eating foliage and bugs as a turtle, just munching slowly.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And now McConnell has to show his hand because what's he going to say? He's just going to take it up? I mean, the Senate Republicans haven't talked about the AHCA. Well, nobody has, for that matter.
Right. I don't know how he's going to do it. I assume he just sort of sits there for a while. And the first question, I guess, the prime mover here is, does the White House, does Trump himself or any other White House operatives begin to pressure him to move quickly, or do they know that it's a disaster too? Or are they hoping that if the Senate drags its feet, they can distance themselves and blame it on the Senate, not necessarily with an eye toward pressuring them to actually move, but just with an eye towards shedding responsibility? And Trump stands there and rails about the filibuster, and the Senate rails back that that's not the issue, and then just nothing happens for a while, and then finally the Senate just does their own bill. There's never an instance where they don't want to do their own bill. I don't think. I mean, I'm sure there's been examples, but not on this. So I assume they're just going to work on their own version of it for a while and just say, these things take time. Maybe now at this point, now it'll take the Senate Republicans to realize what the truth of the matter was with the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Well, the Affordable Care Act was in committee for months, years. We're doing better than them. We're moving much faster. But, the reality is you got to take your time with these things, et cetera, et cetera. And it just sits. I don't know. Well, really nothing to do but wait and see. I got nothing else to add on that. I've said it every way there is to say it, I think.
Where does your congresswoman end up on this bill?
I saw her listed as a no just yesterday. I assume that begins, that stays that way. This is a pretty borderline. This is a not.
Yeah.
I guess it's
she
swinging.
won by a point or two, right?
Yeah. And this is a very highly attuned district. Lots of federal workers, lots of people involved with the federal government, clued in, political junkies, etc. So this is a tough place to hide from something that's in the. You can't hide from the Washington Post headlines here. That's the local paper. So it's awfully difficult. So she's listed as a no. I don't know whether she flips. I mean, she's a pretty good Republican soldier. But I think if they can find their votes in Miami instead, I think they'd prefer to do that.
Yeah, I know. Listen, you heard me typing because people just say things because they want to say things. I mean,
you're doing it now.
Yeah, like me. I'm about to say something that I want to say.
Yes.
There's somebody just says, John Faso won his race over Zephyr Teachout. Zephyr Teachout lost her race. She had D-Trip support. She had plenty of money. She lost. You can try to explain why. Maybe Hillary brought her down, whatever other argument you want. But you can't say Democrats party didn't support her. That's just false.
Oh, are people saying that today? Is that what you're...
Yeah, it's just some idiot on, me. There's some idiot who's wrong on the internet, so...
Oh, wait. Well,
you can't, the famous
can't avoid that
thing. But, okay, let me, you're Charles Schumer. It passes today. What do you say?
Get me to a camera.
Get me to a camera, for sure. He loves the cameras, and it's entirely appropriate for him to actually seek out cameras today. Right. So what does he say?
When the House passes it, I assume he says, there's nothing you can do when someone's determined to commit suicide. They simply are going to do it, and there's very little you can do to get in their way. The House has done it today. They've handed it over to the Senate. I don't see any way this thing passes muster under the Byrd rule, and we're certainly going to object to a number of provisions and really to the whole bill, and ball's in the court of the majority over here. The majority, like in the House, the majority in the Senate schedules the vote. If you want to know how quickly this is going to happen, I can give you the number of the guy who knows. This is the day where Chuck Schumer races to the camera, I think, only to make a comment and then run away from the camera and then say, you need to find Mitch McConnell. Ask him.
I kind of like that part of it. What's Mitch say? I haven't heard him on this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you really want to do a stunt about it, right? He doesn't come out and say anything. So the Senate reporters, they're all staked out at Schumer's office, knowing he'll come to the cameras, and he can come out and tell them what he has to tell them, and then say, do you guys know where Mitch McConnell's office is? Why don't we go over there? I'll show you the way. I'll knock on the door. He usually takes my calls. Bring the cameras. Let's knock on the door and ask him what's up. When are they going to schedule a vote? Hey, they're not answering. This is weird. Are you getting this on camera? Mitch? Hello, I know you're in there.
I think that's an
I saw you go in.
point. It's worth thinking about.
You'll all have to follow me.
Put it on McConnell.
Yeah.
I guess it's now up to the majority leader to decide how he wants to proceed on this.
Right. Well, he's not here, so I'm going to go to the Senate floor and see if he's there. You guys
here's a microphone. I can talk into that one.
Yeah,
too.
right. There's one down there. You guys can't film me, but you can all plug into the C-SPAN feed. I'll go down there and ask if he's on the floor, and if not, does any Republicans want to answer when we're going to have this bill? Be it, if you really want to risk your neck, you want to go out on a limb. I'm going to go down to the floor and make a motion that we take this bill up right now.
Wow.
You really want to risk things. Yeah, don't do that. But,
no, I wouldn't do that.
But, I assume that, it's standard play. I would say that he goes out and...
Greg Sargent with some news.
Yeah?
CBO score will be out early next week.
The CBO doesn't wait. As soon as they think they have something that they can look at, they'll start scoring. I like that about them. CBO works the way a lot of people think that things should work in Washington. That, the rules say they're supposed to score things. They don't have to wait to be invited to score these things. But the parliamentarian isn't going to offer any advisory opinions. I mean, they do in the sense that if someone asks me how would I rule on this thing, if the majority leader or minority leader asks how am I going to rule on this bill that's going to come, they'll talk to them, but they don't just go out and say, well, I know this bill just came over for the House. I'm just going to start ruling on it. So here is Paige Cunningham tweeting that the Senate parliamentarian can't review the AHCA without a CBO score. This answers your question from earlier. And that will likely take 2 more weeks, she says. But so she's saying we're looking at June at the earliest, but you say the latest word is that
next week.
The Senate will be in session next week to receive their answer from the CBO, but then the parliamentarian won't do anything until, and that's just the question of budgetary impact. That doesn't get to germaneness. It doesn't get to jurisdictional issues. So I imagine, like a judge, like a federal judge, the parliamentarian would like to rule on the narrowest possible grounds and won't consider jurisdictional issues and germaneness until they get to the first level, the budget stuff. Although maybe, I don't know. We'll see how they do it. So, okay, so perhaps as soon as next week for the CBO, and I don't know whether the parliamentarian is doing preparatory groundwork and whether they'll answer the next day or whether they'll take their sweet time with it. And I guess that's part of what Chuck Schumer can tell people today. I don't know. Will the parliamentarian be in a big rush to give us an answer or not? And that will tell you, since Mitch McConnell probably likely won't tell you anything today or ever what he plans on doing with this thing. I guess watch the parliamentarian and see whether they think they're moving. And you can start watching them as soon as next week if the CBO is as fast as they say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could do that at the same time, though, right? They could go to the parliamentarian and wait for the CBO score, or
they can go to the parliamentarian, but the parliamentarian will likely say, I can't tell you about the budgetary impact until I have the CBO score. They might ask them to consider germaneness and jurisdictional questions separately, and then say, as soon as we have the CBO score, we'll...
Oh, right. They couldn't do the budgetary score issue, obviously. So, yeah.
All right.
Now, the other thing I heard, tell me if I'm wrong, the Congress recesses on June 15th.
I don't know. I June 15th. Let's see.
I just heard that. It could be that I'm making that up, but I thought I heard the recess comes June 15th.
Let's see.
So they have a month and a half.
All right. Well, I guess
which I think was the premise of the story you were just reading.
Maybe.
I think they were saying that it's impossible because the CBS score was going to take 2 weeks and yada yada.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no way
She
it
was saying,
get
all right. So early June at the earliest was that was the prediction that we were just reading. The tweet
early
about.
June, and can they get it all done before June 15th?
Well, they would only be, I assume, recessing for a week or two and then coming back. I mean, unless they're talking about taking June through August off, which would be a remarkable thing to do, given that they don't have a budget or any, authorization or appropriations bills passed for next fiscal year. All they have is the CR carrying them through September. Let's see, the calendar. Let's take a look at the House calendar. They have that set. I think I'll probably have to open up a PDF to see that. But let's take a look. All right. Yep. Got to open up our. So I was just in it the other day to check on whether or not they were in recess next week. And they are, just the House. But let's see. February, April, May. There. Okay. So May, the House is out next week. And then they're out at Memorial Day into early June. No, I just have. It looks like they're working all of June. So yeah, maybe you just imagined that one. They then take off again for a week for July 4th, and currently would recess as usual for all of August. So, no, I don't think that has much to do with anything. All right. Well, at any rate,
okay, so that's not it.
Yeah.
That I don't think that's a concern. I guess the other thing would be they think they have to do this before they move on to quote tax reform unquote. I'm not sure why, except they need the money, I guess, for that they're going to get from an AHCA budget cut. But here's the thing I don't get.
Yeah. You
tell me. If they repeal the revenue measures in the Affordable Care Act, but have they already spent the money?
I suppose that it depends who you ask and why. I don't know where they think. Are they saying they want to offset the revenue cuts in tax reform, or they don't care?
Well,
about that?
Everyone talks about the tax reform as if I've heard Joan talk about it. I don't know if she talked about it on your show yesterday. She's talked about, the money for tax reform comes from repealing the Affordable Care Act. And that only works if you keep the tax provisions in the Affordable Care Act in place, unless you sort of just look at the, I don't understand it.
If I recall her explanations of things, I guess it just comes from part of the repeal of the Affordable Care Act is just gigantic slashing of outlays. There's also huge tax cuts in there, almost incidentally. That's the chief purpose of the bill, but it's sort of engineered as a reform of the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. That there are certain revenue measures that will go away that'll save wealthy people an awful lot of money, but there's also enormous cuts to Medicaid, as Greg has pointed out, and just across the board spending issues that are mandated under the Affordable Care Act that go away, that I guess you then can shift over. But I also have very little doubt that they can and will simply not pay for tax reform. I mean, why not? They don't have to do that. They believe the tax cuts pay for themselves. So what's the point? They're just slashing Medicaid because they hate Medicaid. I don't really know that they need it for tax reform, since A, nobody knows what the tax reform is, and B, they've already said that tax cuts pay for themselves, and that's been a central tenet of Republicanism forever. And finally, when it comes to stuff they want to do, they're also quite open about reminding everybody that when they need it, deficits don't matter. So, I don't know.
Yeah, but they still have to comply with the Byrd rule. So,
well, with what? With
in terms
reform,
of any tax reform, still, you can't just have tax. I mean, this was the 2003 story. Remember, they did the reconciliation.
Well, only
right?
because they did their tax reform under reconciliation. Yeah, they just want to do tax reform straight up under regular order.
You need 60 votes. I mean, that's all, unless they nuke the filibuster.
Right.
But then they still have the Byrd rule problem, which we've been, it's dominated this discussion of the show. It's, that's what Manchin said, you need 60 votes, I guess. I mean, that's where he's coming from. I guess he probably has gotten a peek at the score and that it doesn't comply with Byrd.
Yeah, well, that would be for two separate issues. Yeah, and, I mean, if they use reconciliation here, now to pass the health care bill, it won't be available to them.
Oh, that's the other thing. You're right. I'm sorry. I missed what you were saying there. So they only get one crack with reconciliation, so they better put the tax reform bit in it now.
If they want to protect tax reform from the filibuster without nuking the legislative filibuster, then yes.
Could that be what McConnell has in mind? To basically fold everything into one bill to send back to the House?
I guess it could be, but yeah. I mean, I guess you could try and do that. I don't know why you would. That would require a rather significant delay, but I'm sure he would think it was worth it.
Well, I mean, I just don't see how they can pass the AHCA or anything like it without making it not subject to the filibuster.
Yes, that they would require for AHCA. Ordinarily, they would probably think that they could pass the tax reform that way, or maybe they don't. I don't know. It depends on what's a priority to who. I mean, it might be just fine for them to say, yeah, we wanted to cut your taxes significantly. We wanted to give you the biggest tax cut in history, but Democrats wouldn't let us. They filibustered it. That might be fine for them. On the other hand, they might be tired of waiting for this gigantic tax cut. I want to cash in, and I want to cash in now. And they might either think Democrats won't stand in the way of a tax cut, or will nuke the filibuster if necessary. Or, I mean, I guess they could say, well, all right, so we'll wait till the next time around. And then in the budget of February, March 2017 for fiscal year 2018, for 2018 for fiscal year 2019, we'll just include reconciliation instructions again and do tax reform under reconciliation in 2019.
In 2019? Wow.
Or rather for fiscal year 2019. And so they would do it in the spring of 2018. Yeah. They could do it, all right. So now it comes to be May 2018, and they're using reconciliation to pass enormous tax reform and tax cuts.
Well, it's tax cuts. I mean, if it's reform, I do recall that in 86, which was an election year, they did the big Reagan tax reform, which was largely reform. I mean, there might have been some effects on wealth distribution, but by and large, it was reform. And it actually, I garnered 60 votes, as I recall. I believe it was fairly bipartisan. No one agreed with the rates, but since everyone said, look, we don't agree on rates and we don't agree how much people should be taxed, but we'll live with what we have and let's reform from there, and then we can start arguing about rates later, which of course we did. Bill Clinton did in 1993 when he changed the rates 7 years later and raised the rate on the wealthy and lowered some of the rates on the poor. So McConnell's got a problem here, doesn't he?
He's got a few. Well, it's up to him how quickly he wants to solve this thing. And I guess we're going to get a first peek at it perhaps tomorrow and next week when the House is gone and it's just the Senate. There will be nowhere else to go for news on Capitol Hill but the Senate, and that's where all the action will be, even though nothing is actually happening. There will literally be an entire press corps with nothing to do but get an answer from McConnell on when they're going to move forward on this thing. It will make an interesting week next week.
It really would. I mean, they've made the goal, the objective, getting 216, or is it 215 or 214? I forget what the number is, because of the missing representative. They've made that the end all. In fact, they're calling that a legislative win for Trump if it passes the House, which is amazing to me.
Yeah.
What do you mean that's a win? How's that a win?
I don't know. There will be a passage of a thing, and he'll say it's a win. How is anything that he says a win? He just declares it to be one, and
someone
very little else.
Keep that. Tell him that all we need to do is pass things in the House. Forget about the Senate, and you'll be considered a great leader.
Yeah, you may believe that.
Right.
Well,
and just one last thought, because I know you need to close up.
Yes.
This presumably will be a huge issue in the two special elections in Montana and Georgia.
Yes.
In the next month, I would hope to see a lot of advertising and discussion from the candidates on this particular issue.
I assume that's going to be a large part of it. One of the stories that Greg brought us, but we didn't get a great deal of time to mention, is that they're able to measure the effect of this. They're seeing this in the Georgia race as Ossoff and who's reporting is Politico. Their headline: Ossoff attracting surprising levels of GOP support in the Georgia special. And well, what other reason would there be? It wasn't the missile strike, probably. So
it's a Trump halo or anti-halo, but this really crystallizes that. And it will be interesting to see if Handel says what. I mean, well, she won't have a vote anymore, but I guess she will, because if something comes back from the Senate, maybe she'll come out against it. Anyway, I know you got to close up. Yep. Thanks for letting me spout a little bit today.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing it, and we'll maybe have an opportunity to do it again tomorrow. Tomorrow being Friday, of course, we'll be without Greg in the morning, but we can reflect on all of the stuff we had in pocket today. We'll also know, I mean, we really had to focus on the ridiculous, catastrophic, pending health care bill today. By the way, thanks to Kate Sherrill for pointing out for us, and I'll recommend for everybody to take a look while it's still ahead of the vote. The CNN Politics wrap up from Phil Mattingly, what to watch in Thursday's health care vote. We didn't get a chance to review that on the air, but I recommend it to you, and you'll be, I think, well prepared if you're planning on sticking by C-SPAN to see this whole thing go down. Tomorrow we can, of course, wrap up the incredible flurry of punditry on just what a disaster, intellectually speaking, Donald Trump really is. It's surprising. I mean, we've been seeing these pieces for a long time, but I don't know. There's just an incredible flurry of them to review. We'll do that tomorrow. In the meantime, handing things over to the after show to let you know about Michigan Governor Rick Snyder cutting off subsidies in February. Afterwards, Flint residents now risk losing their homes if they don't pay for their lead-poisoned water. In a shocking revelation never before considered white nationalist figurehead Richard Spencer,
from Daily Coos
Radio, I'll give it to you after,
on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Yeah, I know, it really is shocking. Believe it or not, white nationalist figurehead Richard Spencer turns out to be a dorky's mama boys with no real accomplishment. No surprise to anyone. And of course, Jason in the house, Chaffetz, surgically repaired foot, still so firmly placed where the sun don't shine, he's going after Obama's pension. Stay tuned for that story coming up next.